All right. Flap for the left wing, flap for the right wing. Hinges. 2-inch hinge is 1 inch on each side. What I'm going to do for the hinges, and this has been talked about before, in the plans, there's 3 hinges, or 3 bolts for the hinges, and you cut out, this is covered with ply, you cut out the ply to get at those nuts. I don't like that. I'm going to cover mine up flush, so these are lower than the level of what the plywood is going to be at. And that'll work. That's not bad. It leaves a little bit there. And then you have to put bracing on the back side that I don't have there yet. I was just cutting to see how they would fit. So glue bracing here, glue it here, and that'll come through there, and that's fine. It would be easier, but they don't have any 3-inch hinges. So this is a 2-inch hinge, 1 inch and 1 inch. Add an extra half an inch on there, and you would have plenty of room going down, and I'll show you the top now where you would have plenty of room as well. So, you've got to remember when you put the hinge on the rear spar, that it's got to flop all the way over. So that's mounted there, and this is mounted on the plane, on the flap. The flap can flop all the way over. It's not at this level though, it's at the level of the ribs. So you have to build a block to put in there that the flap hinge will mount to, and that will flap over like that when you flop the flap over top to fold the wings. When you flop the flap to fold the wings, it's got to go all the way over like that. Now, what I've done, I was just taking a block that fits right on there, and I carved out little notches to fit over top of the geodetic, so that fits flush. Got an F's, got a flopping, flap, fitting flush, fuselage, thingamajigger. So now, I'm not sure why they did, but you've got the blocking underneath there where the flaps are. You're going to have to put blocking on top for the actual flap hinge to mount onto. And since it's so small, that bolt is going to come in here somewhere. So this bottom addition, this bottom bracing on the rear spar for the flap doesn't actually contact the flap at all. It's probably more just bracing to brace that top cap of the rear spar. In addition, you're going to need bracing on top to brace the actual flap hinge itself and the screws going through there. And you can see at each screw point they have that flap additional backing in there, but that's not for the flap hinge. It would be fine if the hinge is way down here, but the hinge sits up like that. If it was down here, that bracing would be fine, but the hinge actually sits up here because it has to be higher than the rib, because that's where your fabric covering is. That's where everything is going to come down, is off of that rib. And you put bracing in here anyways to get it up to this rib level, so that this back rib is connected to this back rib, is solid all the way along there anyways. I never used blocking on the other rib. I used just little pieces of geodetic and built it up and put one final geodetic all the way along the top so that it's right level with the rib and right smooth on the back, so when the fabric goes over, it wraps right around there. I see now that I'm going to have to, well, I'm going to check that other wing out. I'm going to have to put a block on there to make sure it's a good blocking that's strong enough to screw into, because that's what the hinge, just working with one hand here, I need a helper with opposed thumbs rather than paws. And you see, when that's up there like that, that only comes down a little bit there, not into the blocking, which is down below. And the screw, if you put it in the middle, it's going to almost split that. You can put it a little lower, so it's going to go into the spar itself, which may be the thing to do. Why'd you quit? Did it quit, or is it still going? It's still going, okay. Stupid camera. But that's what I'm working on today. It's getting the hinges and the blocking in place here so that we can mount those hinges, mount those flaps, and get that taken care of. And like I said, I was working on this other flap here for the hinge up top there. I want to make it so that the covering comes completely over that. The back of those locking nuts is going to be hidden, so there'll be locking nuts on there, they'll be screwed on, and that will be that for those. All right, so here's what we got going. I'm creating little spacers to go in there. Little spacers to go in there. And that's what this is going to give extra support for the hinge bolts that go through there, because the hinge bolts will come through right about on that split. So I've got those made up. Then on the wing side, this is the rear spar. I've got little spacers made up that fit right on there. On the other wing, like I mentioned, I've already got spacers in between here, just glued up pieces of old geodetic that I put down to raise this up to the rib level. But here I want more substance. Rather than having layers of scraps cut in there, I went with one large chunk that I'll glue on there. I've carved it out to fit right over those geodetics. That'll give more substance for the hinge bolt that's going to go through there. As you see that, it's going to go right through that one, so we need that on there. So what I've done is just take the spacer, I'm going to mark it, and then we'll cut that out. So we've got little grooves cut in there, and it fits right on there like that. That one fits pretty good. I might take a little bit more there. It's a little high there. So I'll take a little of that off and we'll be good to go. It goes up like this. So I'll just sand this flat. Make sure this is flat. And then make sure the surface here and here is at the same level all the way across. So flat here, flat on the back, and flat across the top. And those little braces should be good to go. Same with up here. I'll just sand that so it's nice and smooth, a flush surface there. And the braces for the flap and the rear spar will be done. Then all I'll have to do is put in the other bracing that they have here, the filler gaps, to build that up so it's nice and level all the way across the back, where the fabric will come down and around all the way along. That'll have a nice flat, smooth surface for the fabric. Guess you could do the same or say the same about the flaps. On here there's going to be a piece of 1/32 ply all the way across. I've shown you on this one that we have those nuts mounted for the hinges low enough that I can put the top right over it, and those will be hidden. Then you can fabric cover that anyways, however you want to cover the flap. I know that I'm using 2-inch hinge, which it calls for in the plans. I know that some guys use a continuous hinge all the way along, piano hinge. That might be better. 2 inches on the hinge, maybe even better, and I think that's what I would do. If I was going to build it again, I would get 2-inch hinge. That way, this filler gap is always going to be here, whether it's the little pieces that you just put in everywhere to bring this up level with the ribs, or whether you did the one piece like I've done. This is going to have to be level all the way across. The blocking for that hinge is already in place on the rear spar down to almost about halfway. So there's extra blocking down to about here. A 2-inch hinge, rather than a 1-inch hinge, a 1-inch hinge only goes down so far. A 2-inch hinge would go down an extra 1/2 inch and just allow you to get down into here and go into the actual blocking that's there on the back side. So instead of a 2-inch hinge, if you got a 4-inch hinge or a 3-inch hinge or something bigger that went down further to give a better surface to screw into behind there, is definitely the way to go. And that would be the same for these upper ones. You could get blocking that comes down a little bit further here and then screw in here rather than right up here where the nut's interfering with that plywood that goes across there. So longer blocking, longer hinge that can bolt in at a lower point. So if you're building a Dakota Hawk, if I was doing it again, that's what I would get. Just a longer hinge instead of a 2-inch hinge. Get a 4-inch hinge. I guess that's an inch more on each side. Double the size of that. If you can get a 4-inch hinge, I'm not even sure. I was looking on Aircraft Spruce to get a larger hinge, and 2-inch was all they had. They had smaller hinges, like little ones, but they didn't have anything bigger. So if you can find a bigger hinge out there, that would be the way to go. I couldn't find one in Aircraft Spruce. I'm sure if you went to specialty hinge places and did that, you would find one. All right, one other question that I have. How do we ensure that the hinge pins don't slide out? I was working with this one here, and the hinge pin wanted to slide. So what I did, I took this end and I just clamped it down harder to hold that hinge in place. Is that what people do? I was also thinking of putting some epoxy in the end here and holding that one, see if it would bond on there. Now the thing is with these hinges, they probably never get used. I hear the flaps aren't very good on the Dakota Hawk. probably building it again, I wouldn't build flaps in, but it's two plans for the folding wings. That's why you can't have folding wings without flaps. So maybe we should start a discussion about whether you really need the flaps. I hear they're ineffective on the Dakota Hawk. And flaps. Flaps, are they worth it or not? Flaps, what kind of hinge should you go with? Flaps. That's all I've got for today. All right, it's a beautiful day out there, not a breath of wind. So I took the wing and put it on those sawhorses, and I sprayed it with Minwax Varathane half and half with solvent, and I got at least a couple coats on. So what I did was I took it, put it on the sawhorses, started at one end, sprayed, got around to the other side, and sprayed. By the time I got back here, it was already drying up. So I went and did another coat, went around, did another coat. Let it dry for a couple minutes, flipped it over, did the same thing with the bottom. And came out really nice. Spraying is the only way to go. I spent hours and hours and hours with that wing, brushing into little cracks and stuff like that, and you still don't get in there, whereas the spray, it gets all in those little cracks. It gets everywhere. I mean everywhere. So spraying is definitely the way to go. I got the aileron done as well, and the flap. Spraying, you gotta spray it. Don't even mess around with brushes. I'll take a brush after and just touch up some of the spots that I have to go over again, where I'll have to sand and glue up. And still I got to put on all these little filler spots to get that up to the right level. I still have to put on the aileron well on this side, so just touching up like that. But I was dreading this job, and honestly, setting it up, spraying it, and getting it back here, I'm only maybe a couple hours. And that's cleaning up the spray gun and everything else. So really didn't take that long. The spraying part, maybe half an hour, for crying out loud. It just zipped right through. It's cleaning up the spray gun and then flipping it and doing all that kind of stuff that takes the biggest amount of time. The actual spraying went really well. Okay, I am going to have a cold beverage because she was really nice today. Took the motorbike out, got the daughter's saddle stand all connected and hooked up, and it was a good, busy day. More next week.